A war hero was serving pizza slices when a stranger changed everything forever. But what nobody expected was that this single encounter would expose a conspiracy that had been destroying lives for over 2 years, orchestrated by the very people who should have protected her the most. Meet Sarah Mitchell, former Army sergeant, Purple Heart recipient, and survivor of 3 tours in Afghanistan. For 18 months, she had been hiding behind pizza boxes and delivery caps, her Medal of Valor tucked away in a drawer while she struggled to pay rent on a studio apartment that barely fit her wheelchair. The same woman who once led rescue missions through enemy territory was now being humiliated by teenagers, who mocked her prosthetic leg and thrown spare change like she was begging. Every night, Sarah carefully applied concealer over the burn scars that mapped her left cheek, souvenirs from the IED that ended her military career, and, according to her own family, made her unmarketable for anything better than minimum wage work. Her own brother had called her damaged goods. Her parents had stopped returning her calls after she refused to hide away for everyone's comfort. But on December 15, 2023, retired General Robert Hayes walked into Tony's Pizza Palace for what he thought would be a quick dinner. What he saw instead was a Bronze Star recipient, someone he had personally commended for extraordinary courage, being treated like society's throwaway. The 3 scars across her temple weren't just marks to him. They were proof of the night she carried 4 wounded soldiers through burning wreckage while insurgents fired around them. If you believe that heroes deserve better than society's scraps, smash that like button right now. Comment heroes deserve justice if you're ready to see how one man's recognition sparked a revolution that exposed family betrayal, corporate discrimination, and a conspiracy that had been systematically destroying veterans' lives. Subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice and prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply being seen by the right person at the right moment. This story will shatter everything you think you know about sacrifice, recognition, and the price of true honor. But to understand how one chance encounter triggered an avalanche of justice that reached the highest levels of government, I need to take you back to where Sarah's nightmare really began. 3 years earlier, Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell was everything the Army promoted in their recruitment videos: fearless, dedicated, and unbreakable. At 28, she had already earned commendations that most soldiers never see in entire careers. Her specialty was explosive ordnance disposal, the most dangerous job in active combat zones. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone trained to disarm bombs would be destroyed by one. October 3, 2021, Kandahar Province. Sarah's unit was providing security for a medical convoy when insurgents triggered a coordinated ambush. The lead vehicle hit an IED, trapping for soldiers and burning wreckage, while enemy fire pinned down the rescue team. For 17 minutes, Sarah made trip after trip through the kill zone, her bomb disposal training allowing her to navigate the minefield that had stopped everyone else. She saved all 4 lives. The explosion that finally caught her was the last IED in the sequence, one she triggered while carrying the final wounded soldier to safety. The blast threw her 30 feet, shattered her left leg beyond repair, and left third-degree burns across her face and torso. But Specialist Rodriguez was alive because she refused to leave him behind. The Army awarded her the Bronze Star with Valor. General Hayes himself had pinned the medal to her hospital bed, calling her the finest example of American courage he'd witnessed in 40 years of service. The ceremony was filmed, broadcast, celebrated. Sarah Mitchell was a national hero. Then came the medical discharge, the pension paperwork, the transition to civilian life that nobody had prepared her for. Her family's reaction was immediate and devastating. Her mother, Patricia, couldn't look at her scars without crying. Her father, a successful insurance executive, suggested she consider cosmetic corrections before family gatherings. Her brother, Marcus, always jealous of her achievements, was blunt. "You're not the golden child anymore, Sarah. Maybe it's time to lower your expectations." The job interviews were worse. Companies praised her service, then found excuses why she wasn't the right fit. Too many claimed the wheelchair access would be complicated or that her appearance might concern customers. The whispers behind her back cut deeper than shrapnel. Such a shame. She used to be so pretty. Maybe she should stay home. But the cruelest betrayal came from Veterans Affairs itself. Despite her decorated service, her disability claims were mysteriously delayed, reduced, and repeatedly lost in processing. Someone with access to her files was systematically sabotaging her benefits, leaving her with barely enough to survive while other veterans with lesser injuries received full support. By early 2023, Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, Bronze Star recipient, Purple Heart veteran, hero of Kandahar, was applying for jobs at pizza shops and hiding her medals in shame. What she didn't know was that her name had been flagged in a database used by employers nationwide. Someone had marked her file with codes that guaranteed rejection, and that someone had been collecting payments for every veteran they successfully buried in the system. The trap was set. The conspiracy was active, and Sarah was walking straight into the darkest chapter of her life, completely unaware that her own government was about to become her enemy. The conspiracy against Sarah Mitchell had a name, a face, and a government salary. Director James Crawford of the Regional Veterans Affairs Office. A man who had turned betraying heroes into a profitable side business, Crawford was everything Sarah wasn't: smooth, connected, and completely untouched by war. At 52, he had spent his entire career climbing bureaucratic ladders, while real soldiers bled in foreign deserts. His corner office displayed photos with senators and corporate executives, but not a single image honored the veterans whose lives he controlled with the stroke of a pen. For 3 years, Crawford had been running what he called efficiency protocols, a shadow system that flagged certain veterans as high-maintenance cases and systematically delayed or denied their benefits. His clients weren't taxpayers concerned about government spending. They were private corporations who paid him $5,000 for every disabled veteran he could keep out of their workforce. The scheme was brilliant in its cruelty. Companies would send Crawford lists of veteran applicants, and he would access their military records through official channels. Veterans with visible disabilities, PTSD markers, or difficult injury claims would find their files mysteriously corrupted, their benefits delayed, and their references subtly sabotaged. Meanwhile, Crawford would provide his corporate clients with insider information about which veterans to avoid. Sarah Mitchell's file had been flagged the moment she applied for disability benefits. Bronze Star recipients were especially profitable. Target's companies feared the publicity backlash if they rejected decorated heroes outright, so they paid premium rates to have Crawford handle the problem quietly. But Crawford's biggest mistake was getting greedy. His primary partner in the conspiracy was Patricia Hendricks, Sarah's own caseworker at the VA office. Patricia had access to the most intimate details of veterans' medical records, financial situations, and job applications. For 18 months, she had been feeding Crawford intelligence about Sarah's movements, sabotaging her benefit claims, and ensuring that every potential employer received concerns about her psychological stability and medical reliability. The betrayal went deeper than professional corruption. Patricia had specifically requested Sarah's case after reading about her heroics in military publications. She resented everything Sarah represented: the courage she'd never shown, the recognition she'd never earned, the respect she'd never commanded. Destroying a war hero's life wasn't just profitable for Patricia, it was personal satisfaction. Crawford's network extended beyond the VA office. He had contacts in major corporations, staffing agencies, and even medical review boards. Veterans who got too close to exposing the conspiracy would find their medical records accidentally leaked to employers, their psychological evaluations mysteriously updated with disqualifying conditions, or their disability ratings suddenly reviewed and reduced. By December 2023, Crawford's operation had destroyed over 200 veteran careers, generating nearly $2 million in illegal payments. The money was funneled through a consulting company Crawford owned with his wife, making the corruption nearly impossible to trace through normal channels. But Crawford had made one fatal error in his 3-year reign of betraying heroes. He had kept detailed records of every transaction, every sabotaged file, and every veteran he had destroyed. The evidence was stored on his personal laptop, encrypted but not deleted, because his corporate clients demanded proof that their payments were actually destroying lives. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just another victim to Crawford and Patricia, she was their masterpiece, a decorated war hero reduced to delivering pizza. While they collected bonuses for keeping her unemployable, they monitored her movements, celebrated her failures, and planned to keep her trapped in poverty indefinitely. What they couldn't have anticipated was that one day, she would deliver food to the one person who knew exactly what she was worth, and who had the power to burn their entire conspiracy to the ground. The predators were circling. The trap was perfect, but they had forgotten one crucial detail about war heroes: they don't surrender, even when they don't know they're fighting. December 15th, 2023. Started like every other day in Sarah's carefully managed hell. She arrived at Tony's Pizza Palace at 4 p.m., strapped on her prosthetic leg that had been giving her problems for weeks, and prepared for another shift of being invisible to a world that had forgotten her sacrifice. What Sarah didn't know was that this wasn't coincidence. Patricia Hendricks had been tracking her work schedule through surveillance software installed on Sarah's phone during a routine benefits check. For 3 weeks, Patricia had been coordinating with Crawford to execute what they called the final phase, completely destroying Sarah's last shred of dignity and hope. The plan was surgical in its cruelty. Crawford had contacted Tony Marcelli, the pizza shop owner, with confidential concerns about Sarah's psychological stability. Using his official VA credentials, Crawford had suggested that Sarah was potentially dangerous and showing signs of veteran-related aggression. He provided fabricated incident reports claiming Sarah had threatened supervisors at previous jobs and was unsuitable for customer-facing positions. Tony, a decent man who had hired Sarah out of respect for veterans, was manipulated into believing he was protecting his customers and other employees. Crawford convinced him that Sarah needed to be handled carefully until they could arrange appropriate care for her condition. The suggestion was clear: make her quit, but make it look like her choice. That evening, the attack began. Crawford, had arranged for 3 of his associates, men who specialized in psychological harassment campaigns against problematic veterans, to visit Tony's Pizza Palace as customers. Their job was to humiliate Sarah so thoroughly that she would break down publicly, giving Tony justification to fire her and Crawford documentation to permanently flag her as unemployable due to psychological instability. The first associate ordered pizza, then loudly complained that he didn't feel safe being served by someone who looked like she'd been in an explosion. He demanded to speak with the manager, claiming Sarah's appearance was disturbing other customers and that she seemed unstable and aggressive. The second man made comments about her prosthetic leg, asking if she had properly washed her hands. After touching that thing, he filmed her with his phone, claiming he needed evidence in case she snapped like other veterans he'd heard about on the news. The third associate was the cruelest. He pretended to recognize her from news coverage of her military service, then loudly proclaimed that heroes like her deserved better than this job, but his tone made it clear he was mocking her fall from grace, and he left a penny as a tip, with a note reading, "For your sacrifice, hope it was worth it." Sarah endured it all with military discipline, but inside she was shattering. Each calculated insult was designed to trigger her trauma, force her to react, and give Crawford the evidence he needed to destroy her permanently. The harassment continued for 2 hours, with other customers joining in after seeing her apparent attitude problem. By 8 p.m., Sarah was barely holding together. Her hands shook as she prepared orders, her vision blurred with suppressed tears, and the old nightmares from Kandahar were clawing at the edges of her consciousness. She excused herself to the bathroom and called her caseworker Patricia, begging for help with her delayed benefits so she could quit this job that was destroying her mental health. Patricia's response was the final blow. "Sarah, I've been reviewing your file, and honestly, your psychological evaluations are concerning. Maybe you should consider that you're not ready for employment yet. Perhaps it's time to accept that your service-related injuries extend beyond the physical. I think we need to discuss permanent disability status and supervised care arrangements." The message was clear: surrender completely, accept being labeled as permanently broken, and disappear from society. Sarah hung up the phone and stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The scars, the exhaustion, the defeat in her eyes that hadn't been there in Kandahar, even under enemy fire. For the first time since her injury, Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell considered that maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was too damaged to be anything more than society's broken toy. Maybe her sacrifice had been meaningless after all. She walked back to the kitchen, ready to tell Tony she was quitting, ready to surrender to the conspiracy that had systematically destroyed everything she had left. Crawford and Patricia were minutes away from their final victory, the complete psychological destruction of a decorated war hero. But as Sarah reached for her car keys, she heard the door chime ring one more time. The customer who walked in would change everything, because some people recognize heroes even when they're disguised as pizza delivery drivers. General Robert Hayes had been having dinner alone on December 15th for the same reason he'd been alone for most meals since retiring at 67. He had outlived most of his closest friends, and the young officers he'd mentored were scattered across the globe. He chose Tony's Pizza Palace, not for the ambience, but because it was quiet and close to his modest apartment. He noticed her immediately, not because of the scars. Hayes had seen enough combat to know that wounds were just proof of service. He recognized her because 3 years earlier, he had personally recommended Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell for the Bronze Star with Valor. He had read every detail of her heroic actions in Kandahar. He had held her hand in the hospital and promised that America would never forget her sacrifice. Now she was hiding behind a pizza counter, her medal nowhere in sight, serving food to people who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as her. Hayes observed everything during his meal. The way she moved with military precision despite her prosthetic leg, how she maintained perfect posture even while being insulted by customers, and most telling, how she automatically scanned the room for threats every few minutes. Once a soldier, always a soldier. But what broke his heart was seeing her spirit crushed. The Sarah Mitchell he had decorated was fierce, unbreakable, proud. This woman looked defeated in a way that enemy fire had never accomplished. When Sarah returned from the bathroom with tears barely contained, Hayes made his decision. He approached the counter and said 6 words that changed everything. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell, I remember you." Sarah froze. Nobody had called her by rank in 18 months. She looked up into the face of the man who had pinned America's 4th highest military honor to her hospital gown, and for the first time in years, she stood at attention without thinking. "General Hayes, sir," she whispered, muscle memory overriding her shame. "At ease, Sergeant, walk with me outside. That's an order for the next hour in the parking lot." Hayes listened to Sarah's story with the rage of a career military officer watching the system betray his soldiers. But Hayes wasn't just any retired general. He was the former director of military personnel policy, with security clearances and contacts that reached the highest levels of government. "Sarah," he said finally, "what you're describing isn't bad luck or bureaucratic incompetence. This is systematic sabotage. Someone is deliberately destroying your life, and I guarantee you're not their only victim." Hayes had seen similar patterns during his career, networks of corruption that preyed on vulnerable veterans. His instincts told him this conspiracy reached far deeper than Sarah realized. I need you to do something that's going to sound impossible. After what you've been through, Hayes continued, I need you to trust me, and I need you to fight back. Not with weapons or anger, but with intelligence and patience. We're going to catch whoever's doing this to you and every other veteran they've destroyed. Sarah's first ally in this war wasn't who anyone would expect. Maria Santos was the night cleaning woman at Tony's Pizza Palace, a 58-year-old immigrant, who spoke broken English but understood dignity in any language. She had been watching the harassment Sarah endured, and more importantly, she had been listening to conversations she wasn't supposed to understand. Maria approached them in the parking lot with information that would prove crucial. 3 weeks earlier, she had overheard a phone conversation where Tony discussed Sarah with someone of the caller had warned Tony about Sarah's psychological instability and suggested ways to document problematic behavior. Maria had written down parts of the conversation in Spanish, including a name, Crawford. Hayes felt the pieces clicking. Together, Sarah, this Crawford, is he connected to your benefits case? When Sarah confirmed that Crawford's office handled her VA claims, Hayes knew they had found their target. But he also knew that Crawford wasn't operating alone. This level of systematic sabotage required inside access to veteran records, employment databases, and medical files. Here's what we're going to do, Hayes explained. You're going to continue working here, but now you're working for me. We're going to gather evidence, document every contact with your caseworkers, and build a case that will destroy everyone involved in this conspiracy. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Not just hope for justice, but the familiar sensation of having a mission, a purpose, and a commanding officer who believed in her capabilities. Sir, Sarah said, falling back into military formality, what are my orders? Hayes smiled with the satisfaction of a career officer who had just recruited the perfect soldier for the most important operation of his retirement. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, your orders are to help me wage war against the people who are betraying America's heroes. And Sergeant, yes sir. This time, you're not fighting alone. The hunt was about to begin. And Crawford had no idea that his perfect victim had just become his most dangerous enemy. General. Hayes transformed his apartment into a war room within 48 hours. Military maps were replaced with organizational charts, timelines, and evidence boards that would have impressed FBI investigators. His dining table became Command Central for Operation Justice. Strike his private name for the mission to destroy Crawford's conspiracy. Sarah arrived each morning at 0600 hours, before her pizza delivery shifts, bringing coffee and the discipline Hayes remembered from their first meeting in Afghanistan. For a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers, working with just one felt surprisingly familiar. Quality over quantity had always been his philosophy. Their first breakthrough came from Maria Santos, whose broken English was apparently much better than she let most people believe. Maria had been documenting suspicious activities at Tony's Pizza Palace for weeks, recording conversations and taking photos with the persistence of someone who understood injustice intimately. General Maria explained in nearly perfect English, my husband was deported 3 years ago after someone reported fake documentation. I know what organized cruelty looks like, these people attacking Sarah. They have system, they have plan, they have done this before. Maria had captured audio recordings of Crawford's associates during their harassment campaign, including clear evidence that their visits were coordinated. More importantly, she had photographed business cards they had accidentally dropped, cards that led directly back to Crawford's consulting company. Hayes used his military intelligence contacts to run background checks on Crawford's operation. What they discovered was staggering. The consulting company had contracts with 47 major corporations across 6 states, all focused on veteran employment risk assessment. The language was clinical, but the purpose was clear, excluding disabled veterans from the workforce. Sarah's role was the most dangerous. Acting on Hayes' orders, she began documenting every interaction with her VA caseworkers. But more importantly, she started asking questions designed to make Patricia Hendricks nervous. During their weekly calls, Sarah would mention inconsistencies in her file, ask about other veterans with similar delays, and reference conversations that Patricia claimed never happened. The strategy worked. Patricia began making mistakes, contradicting herself, and providing information she shouldn't have had access to. When Sarah mentioned considering legal action, Patricia's response was telling Sarah, I really don't think you want to go down that path. Some things are better left alone, especially for someone in your condition. Hayes recognized the threat immediately. That's not bureaucratic incompetence, Sarah. That's someone who knows they're guilty and is trying to intimidate you into silence. We're getting close. Their most crucial evidence came from an unexpected source. Hayes had maintained relationships with active duty officers who still owed him favors from his decorated career. Colonel Janet Morrison, now heading up Pentagon Veteran Transition Programs, agreed to conduct an informal audit of regional VA processing patterns. What Morrison discovered was devastating. Sarah's case wasn't isolated. Over 200 veterans in Crawford's region had experienced identical patterns: delayed benefits, sabotaged employment references, and mysterious psychological evaluations that painted decorated soldiers as unstable and unemployable. The smoking gun was in the timing. Every veteran who had been flagged in Crawford's system had attempted to apply for jobs at companies that later contracted with his consulting firm. The correlation was mathematically impossible to be coincidental, but Hayes' military experience taught him that evidence meant nothing without the right audience. They needed someone with the authority and motivation to bring down a federal conspiracy. His solution was elegant. Senator Margaret Walsh, chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee and a former Alpha Army officer herself. Hayes arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing veteran employment challenges, but brought documentation that outlined the entire conspiracy. Senator Walsh's reaction was immediate and volcanic. "General, if what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at systematic betrayal of our nation's heroes at the federal level. This is treason disguised as bureaucracy." Meanwhile, Crawford and Patricia had no idea they were being hunted. Their arrogance had made them sloppy. They continued harassing Sarah, expanded their operation to include more veterans, and grew increasingly confident that their system was foolproof. Patricia made a fatal mistake during a routine call with Sarah on January 8, 2024. Frustrated by Sarah's persistent questions about her case delays, she lost her temper. "Listen, Sarah, some veterans transition successfully to civilian life, and others don't. Maybe it's time you accepted which category you belong in. Not everyone gets to be a hero forever." Sarah was recording the call on Hayes' orders. Patricia had just provided a federal law enforcement officer because Hayes had reactivated his military commission for this operation with clear evidence of discriminatory treatment based on disability status. But as they prepared to spring their trap, Crawford made one final, desperate move. He had noticed Sarah's increased confidence and suspected she might be getting outside help. His solution was to accelerate the timeline and destroy her completely before she could expose his operation. Crawford's plan was simple and brutal. Frame Sarah for threatening behavior that would justify emergency psychiatric commitment. Once she was institutionalized, no one would believe her accusations, and his conspiracy would be safe. The attack was scheduled for January 15, 2024. Crawford had no idea that by targeting Sarah Mitchell one final time, he was about to face the combined wrath of a decorated general, a powerful senator, and a war hero who had just remembered what she was capable of when properly commanded. The evidence was collected. The trap was set. The final battle was about to begin. January 12, 2024. General Hayes' apartment had transformed into a precision military operation that would have made the Pentagon proud. 3 days before Crawford's planned final assault on Sarah, they were preparing a counterattack that would obliterate not just the conspiracy, but everyone who had participated in betraying America's heroes. Senator Walsh had moved with the speed of someone who understood that Crawford's operation represented a national security threat. Within 72 hours, she had assembled a joint task force including FBI investigators, Inspector General agents, and military justice officers. But Hayes insisted on one condition: Sarah Mitchell would be present for Crawford's arrest, wearing her full military dress uniform with every medal she had earned. "This isn't just about justice," Hayes explained to the task force. "This is about restoration. Staff Sergeant Mitchell needs to see her enemies face the consequences of betraying a war hero, and Crawford needs to understand exactly who he was." Trying to destroy the evidence they had gathered was overwhelming. Crawford's laptop, seized through a federal warrant, contained 3 years of communications detailing the conspiracy. Every sabotaged veteran file, every corporate payment, every deliberate act of betrayal was documented with the precision of someone who never expected to be caught. Patricia Hendricks had been even more careless. Her personal emails included celebrations of successful sabotage operations, racist comments about minority veterans, and detailed plans for expanding the conspiracy nationwide. One email to Crawford was particularly damning. "The Mitchell woman is getting suspicious. Maybe it's time for the final solution. Psychiatric commitment will keep her quiet permanently." But Hayes' masterstroke was securing cooperation from Maria Santos as a federal witness. Maria had been recording conversations and documenting suspicious activities for months. Motivated by her own experiences with systematic persecution, her testimony would prove that Crawford's associates had been operating with clear criminal intent, not mere bureaucratic negligence. Sarah's preparation was the most crucial element. For 3 days, Hayes put her through what he called command readiness training, preparing her mentally and emotionally for the confrontation that would determine whether justice prevailed or Crawford's conspiracy expanded nationally. "Sarah," Hayes said during their final preparation session, "tomorrow you're not delivering pizza or begging for benefits. Tomorrow, you're Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, Bronze Star recipient, hero of Kandahar, representing every veteran these criminals have destroyed. You carry their honor with you into that room." The plan was methodical. At exactly 2 p.m. on January 15th, while Crawford was meeting with corporate clients to expand his operation, federal agents would execute simultaneous arrests at the VA office, Crawford's consulting company, and the offices of 3 major corporations that had been paying for veteran exclusion services, but the centerpiece would be Crawford's arrest itself. Hayes had arranged for it to happen at the moment of Crawford's greatest arrogance during a presentation to potential new corporate clients, where he was literally explaining how to eliminate disabled veterans from their workforce. Sarah would be in the room, in full military dress, flanked by Senator Walsh and General Hayes. Crawford would see exactly who he had tried to destroy, and understand that his victim had been a decorated war hero with allies at the highest levels of government. The media strategy was equally precise. Senator Walsh had coordinated with military journalists and veteran advocacy organizations to ensure Crawford's arrest would be national news. The story wouldn't just be about corruption, it would be about the systematic betrayal of American heroes and the conspiracy to hide it from the public. Hayes had even arranged for Colonel Morrison to be present with documentation showing how Crawford's operation had affected over 200 veterans. Each name would be read aloud during Crawford's arrest, ensuring he understood the full scope of his crimes against people who had served their country with honor. Patricia Hendricks would face her own reckoning. Her arrest was scheduled to happen in front of other VA caseworkers, with Sarah present to deliver a statement about how Patrizia had systematically sabotaged her benefits while pretending to help. The woman who had taken pleasure in destroying a war hero's life would face justice, surrounded by the colleagues who had trusted her. But Hayes' most important preparation was psychological. He spent hours with Sarah, rebuilding her confidence, and reminding her of who she really was beneath the months of systematic humiliation. Sarah, tomorrow Crawford is going to see that he made one fatal error in his criminal career, Hayes told her. He chose to target a soldier, and soldiers don't surrender. They complete the mission. January 14th, 11:59 p.m. Sarah Mitchell stood in her apartment, looking at her dress uniform hanging perfectly pressed and ready. Every medal was polished, every ribbon properly aligned. For the first time in 18 months, she looked like the hero she had always been. Crawford and Patricia had no idea what was coming. They were planning Sarah's final destruction, confident that tomorrow would end any threat she posed to their profitable conspiracy. Instead, tomorrow would be the day that Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, Bronze Star recipient, an American hero, would watch her enemies face the justice they had tried to deny her, and hundreds of other veterans. The war was about to begin, and this time, the heroes had the element of surprise. January 15th, 2024. 1:47 p.m. The Riverside Corporate Center conference room buzzed with anticipation as Crawford prepared to deliver his most ambitious presentation yet. 12 executives from major corporations sat around the polished table, each representing companies that collectively employed over 100,000 people nationwide. Crawford's PowerPoint displayed his success metrics, with the pride of a general reviewing conquered territories. Gentlemen, in the past 3 years, our veteran risk assessment protocols have successfully prevented 847 high-liability veteran hires across your organizations. Our return on investment speaks for itself. Every dollar you've invested has saved an average of $23,000 in potential disability accommodations, legal complications, and workplace disruptions. What Crawford didn't know was that FBI surveillance teams had been monitoring the room for 6 hours. Hidden cameras were recording every word, every document, every admission of the conspiracy that had destroyed hundreds of veteran lives for corporate profit. At exactly 2 p.m., the conference room doors opened with the precision of a military operation. Senator Margaret Walsh entered first, her Senate Veterans Affairs Committee credentials displayed prominently. Behind her walked General Robert Hayes, in full dress uniform, ribbons and medals that represented 4 decades of distinguished service, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But it was the third figure who stopped Crawford's presentation mid-sentence. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell entered wearing her Army dress blues. Every medal earned through blood and sacrifice positioned exactly according to military regulation. The Bronze Star with Valor caught the light as she moved with the bearing of a soldier who had just remembered what she was capable of accomplishing. Director Crawford, Senator Walsh announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat before entering politics. I believe you recognize Staff Sergeant Mitchell, the war hero, whose life you've spent 8 months systematically destroying. Crawford's face went white as he realized his perfect victim was standing in his boardroom flanked by a U.S. senator and a decorated general. The corporate executives shifted uncomfortably, suddenly understanding they had been caught participating in a federal conspiracy. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres stepped forward with arrest warrants in hand. James Crawford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, violation of federal civil rights laws, and systematic corruption of government services. Patricia Hendricks, you are under arrest as a co-conspirator in the deliberate sabotage of veteran benefits and employment opportunities. Patricia had been brought from the VA office in handcuffs, her confident facade replaced by the terror of someone who realized their crimes had finally caught up with them. She couldn't look at Sarah directly. The woman she had spent months humiliating was now standing as evidence of her cruel betrayal. "Before you're taken into custody," General Hayes announced, "Staff Sergeant Mitchell has a statement for you both." Sarah stepped forward with the command presence that had once led soldiers through enemy fire. When she spoke, her voice carried the strength of someone who had survived combat, conspiracy, and systematic betrayal and emerged victorious. "Director Crawford, Patricia Hendricks, for 18 months you made me believe I was broken, worthless, and unemployable. You told me my service meant nothing, my sacrifice was forgotten, and my future was hopeless. You were wrong about everything, except one thing: I am dangerous. I'm dangerous to people who betray America's heroes." Sarah removed her Bronze Star medal and held it where both conspirators could see it clearly. "This medal represents the night I carried 4 wounded soldiers through enemy fire while insurgents tried to kill us all. I saved for American lives that night. And yesterday, I helped save the careers of 847 veterans you were planning to destroy. That's what real service looks like." The corporate executives were frantically trying to leave, but FBI agents blocked all exits. Senator Walsh addressed them with the cold authority of someone who understood they were about to face congressional investigation. "Gentlemen, your companies are now under federal investigation for conspiracy to discriminate against disabled veterans. Every contract you signed with Crawford's operation, every veteran you rejected based on his recognition, every dollar you paid to exclude American heroes from your workforce, all of it is evidence in a federal prosecution that will destroy your careers and your companies." Agent Torres began reading Crawford his rights, but Hayes interrupted with one final revelation that shattered any remaining arrogance Crawford might have possessed. "Crawford, there's something else you need to understand. Staff Sergeant Mitchell wasn't your victim. She was our undercover operative. For the past month, every conversation you had with her was recorded. Every threat Patricia made was documented. Every corporate client you bragged about was identified. You didn't destroy a war hero. You handed a war hero everything she needed to destroy you." Crawford's legs gave out as he realized the scope of his defeat. The woman he had spent months systematically humiliating had been gathering evidence to demolish his entire criminal enterprise. Patricia began sobbing as she understood that her cruel treatment of Sarah had been recorded and would be played in federal court, as the FBI led both conspirators away in handcuffs. Sarah stood at attention while General Hayes pinned a new commendation to her uniform, a special recognition from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs for her service in exposing the conspiracy. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," Hayes announced to the room full of corporate executives and federal agents, "your mission is complete. You have served your country with honor both in combat and in peace. Welcome home, soldier." For the first time in 18 months, Sarah Mitchell smiled with the confidence of someone who had just proven that heroes don't surrender, they adapt, overcome, and achieve victory against impossible odds. The conspiracy was destroyed. Justice was served, and America's heroes had won their war against the people who had betrayed them. March 15, 2024. 2 months after the arrests that shattered the largest veteran discrimination conspiracy in American history, the consequences were still rippling through corporate boardrooms and government offices across the nation. Crawford received a federal sentence that reflected the scope of his betrayal: 15 years in prison, $2.3 million in restitution to affected veterans, and permanent disbarment from any government position. During his sentencing, Judge Patricia Williams delivered words that would be quoted in law schools for decades. "Mr. Crawford, you didn't just steal money, you stole hope from the people who earned it with their blood. Your sentence reflects not just your crimes, but your complete abandonment of the values these veterans died to protect." Patricia Hendricks faced her own reckoning with the cold justice of federal court. Her sentence of 12 years included a requirement to personally apologize to every veteran whose benefits she had sabotaged. When her turn came to face Sarah, Patricia could barely speak through her tears. "I'm sorry, Sergeant Mitchell. I was jealous of everything you represented. Courage I never had, sacrifice I never made, respect I never earned. I destroyed your life because I hated mine. But the real justice was systematic change." Senator Walsh's congressional investigation led to the Veteran Protection Act, requiring independent oversight of all VA benefit decisions and criminal penalties for anyone who discriminates against veterans in employment. Crawford's conspiracy had accidentally created the strongest veteran protection legislation in American history. The corporate executives faced their own consequences. All 12 companies involved in Crawford's conspiracy faced federal prosecution, resulting in $847 million in fines and the creation of a victim compensation fund. More importantly, they were required to implement hiring programs specifically designed to recruit disabled veterans, turning Crawford's discrimination network into a national employment opportunity system. Tony Marcelli, the pizza shop owner, who had been manipulated into participating in Sarah's harassment, made amends in the most meaningful way possible. He sold his restaurant and used the proceeds to establish the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, providing transitional employment and support services for disabled veterans. I was stupid enough to believe lies about a war hero, Tony said at the foundation's opening. Now I'm smart enough to spend the rest of my life making up for it. Maria Santos received recognition that transformed her life as dramatically as Sarah's. Her crucial evidence gathering earned her permanent residency status and a position as a federal witness coordinator, helping other immigrants who observed crimes report them safely. Her husband was allowed to return from deportation, and their family was finally reunited after 3 years of separation. General Hayes discovered that his informal investigation had uncovered something much larger than Crawford's regional conspiracy. Similar networks were operating in 15 states, all using Crawford's model to systematically exclude disabled veterans from employment. The FBI created a new task force with Hayes as senior consultant, expanding the investigation nationwide and ultimately exposing over 3,000 cases of veteran discrimination. But the most profound transformation belonged to Sarah Mitchell herself. The woman who had hidden her medals in shame was now wearing them with pride as the Director of Veteran Employment Advocacy, a new federal position created specifically for her. Her first act was to establish rapid response protocols for veterans facing employment discrimination, ensuring no other hero would suffer alone as she had. Sarah's story became a symbol of resilience that inspired legislation, corporate policy changes, and a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. Her Bronze Star, once hidden in a drawer, was now displayed in her office alongside letters from hundreds of veterans, whose lives had been saved by her courage to fight back. The pizza delivery uniform that had represented her humiliation was replaced by business suits and military dress uniforms worn to congressional hearings, corporate boardrooms, and veteran advocacy events across the nation. Sarah Mitchell had gone from delivering food to delivering justice. Her first major speech as director took place at the Pentagon, in front of an audience that included Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and dozens of military leaders. Her message was simple but powerful. 2 years ago, I thought my service had ended when an IED shattered my leg. I was wrong. My real service began when I learned that fighting for America's heroes is just as important as fighting for America itself. The transformation extended beyond individual lives to systemic change. Every VA office in the nation now displayed Sarah's photo alongside other Medal of Honor recipients, with a caption reading, "Heroes serve in many ways in combat, in community, and in the courage to demand justice when the system fails." Crawford's consulting company building was converted into the National Veterans Advocacy Center, with Sarah's office occupying the exact space where Crawford had planned his conspiracies. The irony was perfect. The location where veteran lives had been destroyed was now where veteran lives were being rebuilt. But perhaps the most meaningful consequence was personal. Sarah's family, who had once been embarrassed by her scars and disability, now understood they had abandoned a national hero during her darkest moment. Her brother Marcus became one of her strongest advocates, using his business connections to expand veteran employment opportunities. Her parents, ashamed of their previous reactions, established a scholarship fund for disabled veterans pursuing higher education. The conspiracy that was meant to destroy Sarah Mitchell had instead created the most powerful veteran advocacy network in American history, with Sarah at its center as living proof that heroes don't surrender, they evolve, adapt, and ultimately triumph against any enemy stupid enough to underestimate them. Justice wasn't just served, it was transformed into a permanent shield protecting every veteran who would follow in Sarah's footsteps. June 15, 2024. 6 months after her confrontation with Crawford, Sarah Mitchell stood on the stage at Arlington National Cemetery during the annual Memorial Day ceremony, wearing her dress uniform with pride that radiated from every perfectly polished medal. The woman who had once hidden her scars while delivering pizza was now addressing a crowd of 50,000 people, including the President of the United States. 6 months ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the hallowed grounds where America's heroes rest. I was convinced that my service had ended with an explosion in Afghanistan. I was wrong. My greatest service to my country began the day I stopped hiding and started fighting back against the people who betrayed not just me, but every veteran they systematically destroyed. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation had already placed over 2,000 disabled veterans in meaningful employment. Crawford's conspiracy had been completely dismantled, with similar networks in 15 states facing federal prosecution. The Veteran Protection Act had become law, making veteran discrimination a federal crime with mandatory prison sentences. What began as one woman's fight for dignity had become a national transformation. Maria Santos sat in the front row, now an American citizen whose courage to document injustice had helped save hundreds of veteran careers. General Hayes, promoted to senior advisor for the Department of Veterans Affairs, watched with the satisfaction of a commander who had successfully completed the most important mission of his career. Even Tony Marcelli was present, his foundation having expanded to serve veterans in 12 states. But the most profound change was in Sarah herself. The shame that had once made her hide her medals was replaced by a fierce pride that inspired everyone around her. Her scars were no longer marks of tragedy, they were badges of honor that proved she had survived everything enemies and traitors could inflict, and emerged stronger than ever. The lesson isn't that the system will always protect you, Sarah continued, her words being broadcast live across military bases worldwide. The lesson is that when the system fails, heroes step up to fix it. Every person who fights injustice, who refuses to accept betrayal, who stands up for those who can't stand up for themselves. You are continuing the mission that began on battlefields and continues in boardrooms, courtrooms, and communities across America. Crawford was serving his sentence in federal prison, his conspiracy destroyed and his victims vindicated. Patricia Hendricks had become a cautionary tale in VA training programs. Her betrayal of veterans used to teach new caseworkers about the sacred trust they hold with America's heroes. The corporate executives who had paid to exclude veterans now funded the largest veteran employment initiative in history. Justice had been served, but more importantly, justice had been transformed into systematic change that would protect future generations of veterans. Sarah's courage to fight back when everyone expected her to surrender had created a legacy that would outlive everyone involved. If you've watched this entire story, and only 3% of viewers have the dedication to reach this point, you understand something profound about the nature of heroism. Heroes aren't created by medals or ceremonies. Heroes are created by the decision to fight for what's right even when fighting seems hopeless. Comment heroes never surrender. If Sarah's story reminded you that justice is worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the enemies or how impossible, the odds your comment isn't just support, it's a commitment to stand with veterans who face discrimination and betrayal. Subscribe to this channel because you're not just watching stories. You're joining a community that believes America's heroes deserve better than society's scraps. When you subscribe, you're supporting the telling of stories that mainstream media ignores, stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things when circumstances demand heroism. Share this video because Sarah's story isn't entertainment, it's education. Every person who watches learns that conspiracy can be defeated, that heroes exist in unexpected places, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply refusing to surrender. Sarah Mitchell's journey from hidden pizza delivery driver to national advocate proves that heroism isn't about the uniform you wear or the medals on your chest. Heroism is about the moment you decide that justice matters more than comfort, that truth matters more than safety, and that fighting back matters more than fitting in. Remember Sarah's words from that day at Arlington Cemetery. Heroes serve. In many ways, some carry rifles, some carry briefcases, some carry cameras to document injustice, and some carry the courage to stand up when everyone else sits down. The only requirement for heroism is the decision to act when action is needed. Your heroic moment might be defending a veteran facing discrimination, exposing corruption you discover at work, or simply refusing to ignore injustice when it's easier to look away. Sarah Mitchell proved that one person's decision to fight back can change thousands of lives and transform entire systems. The question isn't whether you're capable of heroism. The question is whether you'll recognize the moment when heroism is required and have the courage to answer the call. Because in the end, heroes aren't born, they're made by the choice to fight for justice when justice needs a champion.